What is going on, you guys? Welcome back to another Swift video. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at modern cell configuration. This is something that was introduced this year, actually, in WWDC. Basically, it's a way to configure cells in a table view or a collection view in the new way that Apple has presented. We're going to walk through an example, talk about why they changed it, the advantages, and how you should start thinking about adapting your code to make sure the old way, once it goes away, doesn't break your projects. So that said, here we are on the Apple developer website. Here is a list content configuration. The premise here is really you pass in a configuration to update your cell rather than updating the views on it directly. So we're gonna do this with an example because it's hard to verbalize. It's easier just to see it. That all said, make sure you destroy the like button as always, helps out with engagement in the YouTube algorithm. Of course, hit subscribe if you're a returning viewer and like these videos. Get Xcode ready, get excited. Let's talk about some modern cell configuration. Quick pause before we get into the video. If you haven't seen it already, I am hard at work putting together iOSacademy.io, a community where all of us iOS engineers can come together, learn how to build some of the top apps like Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram, in addition to interview prep to land some of these iOS roles at top tech companies. So if you're interested in the free and premium content to come, head on over to iOSacademy.io and enter your email address in the waitlist form, and you will be notified as content becomes available. That said, let's get into the video. All right, so we're going to begin by opening up Xcode and creating a new project here. I'm going to go ahead and stick with the app template, and we're going to go ahead and call this modern cell config. Make sure your language is Swift, of course, lifecycle UI kit, and interface is storyboard. Go ahead and continue. We'll save it on our desktop. And the first thing we need to do here is hop into our view controller, and we're going to want to set up a basic UI table view. And the way we set it up and use it is not the thing that's changing. Rather, it's just the way we configure the cell. So let me actually first expand my Xcode window to give ourselves a little more room to work. And let me also select the relevant simulator from this list and hit this run button to get it booted up here. In just a moment, there it goes. So cool. So here in the view controller, we're just going to set up a very basic table view. So it'll be a private let table view, UI table view, just like that. And we're going to start off with a basic cell on here, but we're actually going to create our own custom cell also to take a look at this modern configuration stuff a little bit more in depth. So let's create that table. And we want to return the table, but we don't want to steal that parenthesis from up there. So let's put that back. And let's make sure we go ahead and register a table view cell. And we'll just register it within the ID of cell. And let's see, so here we want to now add it as a subview and assign its delegate and its data source, just like that. And we also, of course, want to give it a frame. So we're going to say the frame of the table view is equal to the view.bounds. And this is going to give us two errors because we're not conforming to those protocols. So up here, we want to add a comma and say UI table view delegate and UI table view data source. And finally, we want to implement two functions. The first one will be number of rows. We'll go ahead and return 10. And the next one is going to be cell for row at index path. So cell for row at index path. And just like we did before, we're going to go ahead and dequeue a reusable cell with an ID. And this is the same string we used to register our cell. And we'll go ahead and return said cell. Let me assign the text on it to be hello world, and then also pass in the position of the cell +1, since this starts out at 0. And then I'll also go ahead and set a image on it so it doesn't look totally blank. So we'll say the image is going to be a UI image with a system image of, let's go with Bell. I think that's one of the images that are built in. So if you go ahead and hit Command R, You should see a very basic table view like so, and the way we configured it here is the old way of configuring it, and nothing is different, as I'm sure you all know already. So what the heck is modern cell configuration? So there's two things to understand here. The first thing to understand is we're actually updating the text label and image view directly, and we're assigning their properties. So in this case, a text and image. So that's one thing to understand. If it was a subclass, we would cast it as our class, as my custom cell, and just assign our own subviews. The notion of a cell configuration is instead of updating these subviews ourselves directly, we create a fresh configuration every time we want to show a cell, and we assign that configuration, and that internally will update all of the contents of our view as well as the background and all the other stuff we could possibly think about tweaking. So it's pretty simple actually how you create a cell configuration. You can just say config. Let's say configuration is cell, and we want to get, whoops, we should probably do it after we create the cell. That would be smart. And we want to say default configuration. So default configuration, content configuration. So there's actually two different types of configurations. There's a background configuration and a content configuration. We're just going to stick with the content configuration for a moment, and we'll talk a little bit about background configs when we subclass this. But we can actually get rid of these two lines. Actually, instead of getting rid of them, we can actually update it. So on this configuration, we can actually go ahead and assign the text on it directly. And we should make this a var so we can assign things on it. And on this configuration, we can actually assign the image. And now what we can do is on the cell, we can assign its content configuration to be configuration. And if you go ahead and run, you'll see that it looks exactly the same. So that kind of raises the question of what the heck is the point of doing this? Like, why would I, as a developer, go and change my code and write this? And the reason is really twofold, well, threefold. The simplest part is because this is the new way to do it that Apple wants us to do, and the other two reasons are real reasons. The second reason is a cell configuration is a value type, and they're extremely inexpensive to create. So if you're familiar with the model view model architecture, this is basically Apple making that first party. So generally, we create a model, and then from that model, we create a view model that we pass into our cell to configure it, right? Very similar concept of our view model would have things like text on it, the image, all of the view related information that's needed to present things in the cell, right? So we don't actually pass in the UI label or UI image view, we pass in the configuration. This is literally the exact same concept. Because they're value types, they're really easy to be changed. Apple actually goes as far as to call this composable because it really is. And the other huge advantage that this gives us is that we can now handle different states of our cell without a ton of redundant code. So what's a different state of a cell? So one different state is when it's selected, so that's a state. Once is when you tap it down, so there's highlighted, selected, disabled, or if you're reordering a cell and you have the little thing where you can grab it here and move it around, those are all different states. And if we wanted to show our cell in a different visual format, it's kind of a pain today to be able to do that. You end up writing a bunch of if-else statements and a lot of view code. So let's take a look at how the cell configuration business makes our life simple. So what we're going to actually do is we're going to create a custom subclass of a table view cell, because generally we don't really use the default cell. People like to create their own cells. So we're going to create a new Cocoa Touch class, and this is going to be a UI table view cell. And I'm going to call this custom table view cell, just like that. Make sure it's Swift and go ahead and create it. And we're not going to do anything too fancy on here with our own subviews, but we are going to look at one really important function. But first, we want to give this an identifier and register it on our view controller. So let's hop back to our view controller file here. And I'm going to go ahead and register this with the given ID. And then here we want to dequeue the appropriate ID as well as the given type. And if it's nil, we'll go ahead and coalesce it to a UI table view cell, just like that. And let's actually go ahead and take all this code and pull it out of here and go into our cell subclass that we created. And there's actually a new function available in iOS 14 on the subclass, if I'm not mistaken, called update configuration using state. This one right here. So as the name implies, well, first we need to call super update configuration using state because we're overriding this. And let's go ahead and paste that code in there. And what we can actually do is get rid of all those cell calls and do that. And what this function actually does, as the name kind of implies, is, we'll take care of this error in a moment. What it actually does is that whenever the state of the cell changes, so for example, highlighted or disabled or selected, you're able to check its value and create a new configuration accordingly. So let's actually command click into this. I actually haven't ever seen it myself, so let's take a peek. So you can see first and foremost, there's a drag state, right? So that's interesting. Is it being dragged? Is it lifting? Is it dragging? You can do an equality check on here for if it's equatable or not. What else is on here? There's a drop state. There's probably a bunch of other states too. So disabled. So this is also important. You can check the things like trait collection. So that's like dynamic font if the user has their accessibility font size to be larger, if it's light mode or dark mode. You can check things like focused. I don't even remember what this is in all honesty. Expanded, swiped. So the list goes on and on. And what's really powerful about this is you can have one function that does all of this for you via the state parameter, and it's super, super clean and organized. So let's take care of this error. This is yelling at me because index path doesn't exist anymore. So we're just going to say that. And I believe we want to say on here using, rather updated. Is that what I want? Yes, updated. Updated for state. So basically, what we're going to go ahead in here and say is whenever this function gets called, which is whenever the state changes, go ahead and create a configuration that's updated for the state. And the default configuration, content configuration, is the one that Apple gives us based on the style. So if we command click on here, you can see there is a default content configuration, just like that. There's also a default content configuration for different types of views. So I alluded to this, but didn't really explicitly call it out. But this configuration business can apply to things like headers, footers, collection view cells. It's not just limited to table views, list content views, the list goes on. So cool. So let's actually use that state and let's talk about, let's actually rather see instead of talking about what it looks like in action. So let's say it's highlighted or the state is selected. Let's say we wanted to change the text color and the image tint color. How would we go ahead and do that? So we don't want to access the image viewer or the UI label directly. What we're going to say is configuration. I believe it's text properties. And then there's a color on here. So there's color. And we're going to go ahead and say, if it's in one of those states, we're going to say it is red. And then let me go ahead and update the image properties as well. So you're starting to see a pattern where we're updating properties very similarly to how view models are handled. And there's a tint color on here. We're going to go ahead and make this yellow. I wonder if there's a background on here. I don't think there is. There is not. So let's go ahead and run this and we'll see what it looks like. So still looks the same. When I tap down on it, now you can see that the color of the text is red and our tint color is yellow. And we can tap on it and it stays in the selected mode because we don't call it deselect. But what's really powerful about this is that we don't need to do the checks for state because this function is called every single time that the table view updates its state or it knows that something needs to be changed. And another big takeaway from this is Apple basically hiding a lot of the optimization from us third-party developers, and we kind of get all of this for free. Now it's our responsibility to take all this information and make our stuff look nice and pretty and configurable for the user. So that's how that works. The other thing that I'll mention is that there is a background configuration. So if I actually command click into this default content configuration, let's actually try just doing it here. So instead of default content configuration, let's do background configuration. And so the background configuration, if we command click into this, you'll notice that there is a background configuration and it is of type UI background configuration. Let's click into that. And as the name implies here, this has things in it. Looks like it didn't jump. Looks like it did. Okay, so the background configuration has things in it that include things like the background color. It has things in it that include things like the background custom view. Let's see if we can jump to it. Here we go. UI background configuration. It's an NS object and it has a clear configuration. It has a list plain cell configuration. And notice that these are all static configurations. And let's actually, instead of looking at it, let's just create one. So we're going to want to go ahead and create, let's see, I think one of them was plain. Let's just do update using state, what we did before. So we're going to say update using state, and let me go ahead and let's take a look at what properties are on here. So the first thing you can take a look at is there's a background color on here, surprise. So let's go ahead and make this, I don't know, let's go ahead and make this purple. And again, with that same state business, what we can do here is we can say if the state is highlighted or selected, we're going to change the background color now because this configuration is now a background configuration. And we're going to go ahead and say when it's selected, it's orange. And here we're going to go ahead and say we want to assign the background configuration instead of the content configuration. Let's go ahead and run that and let's make sure it works. So it's red and we can't even see our text and all that stuff. But if I click on it, you can notice that it changes. The reason our text and image disappeared is because I deleted it off the content configuration. And that's the last point I wanted to make before wrapping up this video. The idea is not to use one or the other in terms of a background configuration or a content configuration. The idea is to use both, right? Because you really need both to actually populate your cells. So let me hit undo here to Command Z a few times and get all those working again. So here we have our content configuration again. And what I'll go ahead and do is right below this, let me go ahead and paste in that background configuration stuff we had. And let me just update all of these parameters, other properties. Let's update that, that, and that. And I'm actually going to change that to be in the same if block so we're not redundantly adding if blocks. And we're going to put that down here. And this is what this would actually look like in practice. So I know I just moved a bunch of things around, so I'll go through it in just a second. But you can notice we have the content. We can also control the content styling as well as the background styling through these objects. So what did we do here? So just to recap, we created a content configuration, which is basically like a view model. We assigned the properties on it, like a text and image. We created a background configuration, and keep in mind, both of these configurations are being updated to be the default look and feel based on the state that gets passed in by the system. And then based on the state, we're going ahead and updating things. And all we're doing is just reassigning those properties on this cell. So you can in fact do this directly in your view controller if you'd like, but as you might know from working on large apps, it doesn't scale very well. So you should definitely create your subclasses and keep things nice and organized. So hopefully that made sense and that was a good primer for modern cell configuration. There's a lot more content here, so maybe I'll make follow-up videos on this if y'all are interested. That said, make sure you hit that like button if you haven't done so already. Helps out the videos quite a bit. Helps with engagement, video reach, all that good stuff. Comment down below. Do you think this is useful? Do you like it? Does it make sense? To me, it looks a lot like view models, and it's just kind of Apple taking the pattern that we all use, know, and love, and just incorporating it directly into UI Kit, which is really great to see. They're not calling it that, obviously, because it's kind of a matter of naming, but it's essentially, it's the way I see it. It's basically that. So definitely leave your thoughts down below. Helps out in general with video engagement too. But I love hearing from all of you guys, and I try to reply fairly quickly to each and every one of you. So the last annoying thing I want to say is make sure you hit subscribe. Also helps out with the channel growth and helps me stay motivated to create these daily videos for y'all. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you guys in the next one.